Rick has always been a very active and curious boy, but he did not have enough space for games and all sorts of development, because he and his parents lived in a small city apartment with rather noisy neighbors. But after a while luck turned to Rick's family and his father was promoted at work, and they even had a chance to think about buying a house, at least with a mortgage. Flipping through advertisements for houses for sale, they came across one very old house, one that had been built before the war. It did not look dilapidated and was in fairly decent condition, but the price was reduced almost 3 times. Rick's parents really liked the house, but they were worried about the low price. Nevertheless, they decided to call and come and see the house with their son. The house was large and spacious, and in some places it needed some cosmetic repairs, but that was not a problem. The realtor attributed the decrease in price to the fact that the owner needed to move quickly and sell the house as soon as possible. Rick's family was very reassured by this, and they decided to buy the house after all. A couple of weeks later, when the paperwork was done, they were able to move into their new home. Rick was already really excited about his new room. He loved it. It was very spacious and twice the size of their room in the old apartment. One day when Rick was in his room looking for the best place for his future new computer desk that he was going to borrow from his parents, he noticed a hole in the wall, right across from his bed. It was about the size of his eyes, and when he tried to look there, he saw nothing but total darkness. This was strange, since it was light outside and there should be at least some light in the next room. Rick went into that room to check it out. It was littered with boxes, as his father was going to make it his office, but hadn't time to unpack completely yet. When he got to the place where the hole was supposed to be, it wasn't there, which surprised Rick very much. He wanted to ask his parents about it, but they weren't at home because they had gone to the store. And when they came back, Rick was already playing in his room and had safely forgotten about that hole in the wall. The next day Rick noticed a new hole in the wall that was very close to the old one. In the next room, there was also an entire wall without any new holes. Rick still asked his parents about it, to which they said that there was a small space in the walls of their new house that they thought was for utilities, that is, they just put pipes in them. That's why it was dark in there. As for the new hole, they said he was just imagining it and maybe it had been there from the beginning, and it wasn't surprising since the house needed some repairs after all. Rick was satisfied with that answer and decided to ignore the holes. But each night after that, as if there were more holes in the wall and they were located in completely different places. Rick still tried to ask his parents about it, but they just shrugged it off, saying he was just imagining things. But when he noticed a new hole that appeared right at the head of his bed, he was scared out of his wits. That night he asked to sleep in his parents' room. They didn't like the idea very much, of course, but they let him sleep in their room for one night. They had a little couch in the bedroom not far from their bed. That night Rick fell asleep peacefully. But in the middle of the night he heard some sounds as if someone was scratching at the wall. When he opened his eyes he saw small pieces of broken plaster on the floor by the wall. When he looked up he saw a hole in the wall that had an eye in it. Rick jumped up and immediately woke up his parents. When they woke up, They were really a little surprised by the hole in their room, but concluded that it had always been there. They just didn't pay attention to it. But when his son began to prove to them that he saw an eye there, which was watching him, they were really scared for his mental health and already wanted to see a child psychologist, but Rick really did not want that, so he said that maybe he had just dreamt it. But he slept in his parents' bedroom for the rest of the night. The next morning when he returned to his room, he noticed that the holes in the wall had not increased, so he still dared to stay in his room the next night. But when he went to bed, he heard again the sound of someone scratching in the wall, and these sounds increased in number and were louder. When he hardly opened his eyes, he noticed in horror that all the walls were studded with these holes, in which there were many eyes watching him. This time his parents still had to believe their son, maybe not completely, but the sudden appearance of so many holes they could not find an explanation. In the morning they called a team of workers to the house, who helped to break down the wall in their son's room. Inside there was indeed a small space where one person could fit. Walking along the wall they noticed a human skeleton in the corner. As it turned out later, these were the remains of a man who had owned the house several years earlier and had been convicted of pedophilia, but he could never be punished for what he had done, because he had disappeared the day before, and his remains were only found several years later in the walls of the house.